Hi guys and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we step quietly into a place where the air already feels sharper than it should. You stand at the edge of a clearing somewhere on the American frontier, sometime in the late 18th or early 19th century, though no one here is counting the years as carefully as you might expect. The sky hangs low-heavy with a dull grey light that never quite warms the ground. The trees around you stand still and watchful, their leaves thinning their branches, beginning to harden for what is coming next. You pull your coat a little tighter even though it is not yet truly cold. Not yet, but there is a feeling here, something in the wind that brushes across your face. It is dry and it carries a quiet warning. You probably will not survive this. Not comfortably at least. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, tell me where you are in the world right now and what time it is as you listen. I always find that strangely comforting. Now dim the lights and let yourself settle into the slow rhythm of this place. You step forward into the clearing, boots pressing into soil that has already begun to stiffen overnight. The cabin ahead of you is small, built from rough logs stacked one atop another, their surfaces uneven and darkened by weather. Thin lines of pale clay and mud are pressed between them. This is called chinking, a simple but essential barrier against wind. Without it, the cold would slip inside as easily as breath. A widely accepted historical detail tells us that many frontier cabins were built quickly, often in just a few days, using hand tools and whatever timber stood nearby. Speed mattered more than perfection. Winter did not wait for craftsmanship. You can almost hear the echo of that urgency as you approach the door. The roof is low, covered in wooden shingles, weighted down with stones. There is no glass in the window, only oiled paper stretched tight to let in a faint glow. It flutters slightly when the wind passes. Inside, someone is moving. You pause for a moment before entering, listening to the sounds around you. The forest is quieter than you might expect. No insects hum, no birds call, just the occasional creak of a branch and the faint rustle of dry leaves skittering along the ground. Even nature seems to be holding its breath. Historians still argue whether settlers truly understood how severe frontier winters could become before experiencing their first full season. Some letters suggest confidence, even excitement. Others hinted unease at rumours of snow that buried fences and winds that froze skin in minutes. Standing here now, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between, hope mixed with a lack of imagination. You reach for the wooden latch and push the door open. Warmth greets you, but only dull. The interior is dim lit by a small fire crackling in a stone hearth. The smoke does not entirely escape. It lingers faintly in the air, giving everything a hazy softness. The smell is sharp but not unpleasant. Wood smoke, damp wool, and something cooking slowly in a pot. A woman looks up briefly as you enter, her expression calm but alert. A child sits near the fire, wrapped in layers that seem too large, watching the flames with quiet focus. In the corner, a man is working with a tool, shaving thin curls from a piece of wood, perhaps shaping a handle or repairing something that broke days ago. No one speaks right away. Conversation here is measured. Energy is saved. You move closer to the fire, holding out your hands. The heat is uneven. One side warms quickly while your back remains chilled. This is the reality of frontier comfort. It exists, but only in small pockets. A lesser-known detail is that some settlers would hang blankets or animal hides along interior walls to create an extra layer of insulation. It was not elegant, but it helped trap heat and block drafts. You notice something similar here. Rough fabric pinned against the logs, shifting slightly with every movement of air. Outside, the wind picks up just a little. It slides along the walls of the cabin, testing them, searching for weaknesses. You can almost imagine it slipping through tiny cracks, whispering its way inside, reminding everyone that this is only the beginning. You glance towards the door again, thinking about what lies beyond it. There are no ploughed roads, no steady supply lines. Everything these people will need for the coming months must already be here or within reach. Once the snow deepens, movement becomes difficult. Once the storms begin, it can become impossible. The man by the corner sets down his tool and stretches his fingers slowly, as if even that small motion carries a cost. He looks toward the fire, then toward the ceiling listening. You realize he is measuring the wind, not with instruments, but with experience. There is a quiet rhythm to this life, one that begins long before the first snowfalls. You notice the stacked firewood near the wall. Not enough, you think instinctively, or perhaps just enough if used carefully. Every log represents time spent cutting, hauling, splitting. Every log burned too quickly is a mistake that cannot be undone. The child shifts slicing, pulling the fabric closer around their shoulders. Their cheeks are already a little red from the cool air that still seeps into the room. Winter is not here yet, but it is close enough to be felt in small ways. A subtle but curious tidbit is that some frontier families would test the coming season by observing animal behavior. If squirrels gathered more nuts than usual, or if certain birds left earlier, it was taken as a sign of a harsher winter ahead. Not scientific, perhaps, but in a place like this, any clue felt worth noticing. You find yourself listening more carefully now. The wind again, the fire, the slow, steady breathing of the people around you. There is no panic here. Not yet, just preparation, quiet and constant. You settle onto a rough wooden bench, letting the warmth reach you in small waves. Time feels different in this space, slower, heavier. Each moment stretches slightly, as if even time must work harder in the cold. Outside, the sky darkens just a shade more. The first real frost will come soon. Then the ground will harden. Then the snow will begin soft at first, almost gentle, and then without much warning it will stop being gentle at all. You look around the cabin one more time. This small space, these few people, these simple tools. This is everything standing between life and a season that does not forgive mistakes, and somehow they know it. You lean back slightly, letting your eyes soften, your breathing slow. The story has only just begun, and already you can feel the weight of the cold pressing quietly at the edges of everything. The next morning does not arrive with light so much as a pale suggestion of it. You wake to a dim grey glow pressing softly through the oiled paper window, the kind of light that feels thin and uncertain, as if the sun itself is reluctant to rise. The fire has burned low during the night, reduced to a bed of quiet red embers. The air inside the cabin carries a faint chill, now enough to make you pull your covering closer before you fully sit up. No one lingers in bed for long here. You hear movement almost immediately. The woman is already awake, stirring the ashes with a stick, coaxing what remains of the fire back into life. She works carefully, almost gently, as if the embers are something alive that must be persuaded rather than forced. Keeping a fire alive overnight was a common and essential practice on the frontier. Letting it go out completely meant starting again from scratch, which could take precious time and energy. You notice how she adds a few thin pieces of kindling first, then waits watching for the small tongues of flame to catch and grow. You sit up slowly, your breath faintly visible in the cool air. There is a quiet urgency in the room now, not rushed, not frantic, but steady. Every movement has a purpose. Every action seems to follow an invisible plan that has been repeated many times before. The man reaches for his coat, a heavy worn garment that looks as though it has been repaired more times than it was originally made. He pulls it on without hesitation, then moves toward the door. Before opening it, he pauses, hand resting on the latch, listening again. Always listening. You follow his gaze, even though you cannot hear what he hears. The wind has shifted slightly, softer now, but colder. That kind of cold that slips through fabric and settles into bone if you're not careful. He opens the door just enough to step outside, and for a moment the cabin fills with a sharper gust of air. It brushes past your face, crisp and dry, carrying with it the scent of frost forming on wood and earth. You step closer to the doorway, peering out. The ground is dusted with a thin layer of white. Not snow exactly, but frost thick enough to give the illusion of it. Every surface seems touched by it. The grass, what remains of it, crunches faintly underfoot. The trees look harder now, their branches outlined in pale edges. The first real sign. Historians continue to debate whether early settlers underestimated how quickly temperatures could drop once autumn passed its peak. Some records suggest sudden cold snaps that caught entire communities off guard, freezing crops still in the ground and water left uncovered overnight. Standing here, you can imagine how easy it would be to misjudge a season that changes so quietly at first. The man steps out fully now, boots pressing into the brittle ground. You watch as he walks toward a small stack of logs set a short distance from the cabin. He tests one with his foot, then bends to pick it up, examining its weight and dryness. Firewood is not just wood, it is time, effort, and foresight. You follow him outside, the cold wrapping around you more completely now. It is not yet painful, but it is insistent. It reminds you of its presence with every breath. Nearby you notice something else. The cabin itself is positioned carefully, not by chance. One side faces away from the prevailing wind, offering some protection. A cluster of trees stands just beyond it, acting as a natural barrier. The door is not placed directly where the strongest gusts would strike. Choosing the right location for a cabin was often as important as how it was built. Settlers learned to use the land itself as part of their defense against the elements, placing homes near tree lines, hills, or other features that could break the wind. A small, almost curious detail is that some families would deliberately leave certain shrubs or low branches intact around their homes, even when clearing land. These acted as additional windbreaks, catching drifting snow before it could pile up directly against the walls. You turn slowly, taking it all in. The sky remains overcast, a heavy blanket that seems to press downward. There is no warmth in it, no promise of a bright day ahead. Just a steady, muted light that flattens everything into shades of grey and white. The man returns with an armful of logs, carrying them with practiced ease. He does not waste mummy's motion. Each step is deliberate, each breath measured. You get the sense that even this simple task is part of a larger calculation. How much wood remains, how quickly it is being used, how long it must last. Back inside, the fire has begun to grow again. The woman adds another piece of kindling, then places one of the thicker logs on its top, adjusting it carefully to allow air to flow. You notice how she watches the flames for a moment longer than necessary, as if committing their strength to memory. There is no excess here, no room for carelessness. You sit near the hearth, again holding your hands out. The warmth returns, slowly spreading through your fingers, then your arms. It feels earned somehow. The child has woken now, rubbing their eyes and shifting closer to the fire. There is no complaint, no lingering sleepiness, just quiet acceptance of the day ahead. You glance toward the walls of the cabin, studying them more closely this time. The logs are uneven, their surfaces rough and marked with the scars of tools. The chinking between them has been pressed in by hand-filling gaps where wind might otherwise slip through. In some places it has cracked slightly, leaving thin lines that will need to be repaired before the deeper cold arrives. A fringe idea from some historical accounts suggests that a few settlers experimented with mixing animal hair into their chinking material, believing it would strengthen the seal and reduce cracking. Whether it truly made a difference is unclear, but it shows the constant search for small advantages in a harsh environment. You reach out and touch the wall. It is cold even from the inside. The fire can only do so much. The man sets down the remaining logs, then begins checking other parts of the cabin. He presses lightly against the door frame, adjusts a hanging cloth, and glances toward the roof beams. Each action is small, but together they form a kind of quiet inspection. Preparing for winter is not a single task. It is a collection of many small ones repeated and refined over time. Outside, the wind shifts again, carrying with it a faint whisper of something colder still. You feel it even through the walls. This is how it begins. Not with a sudden storm, not with dramatic snowfall, but with these small, steady hundred heads. A little colder each morning, a little more frost each night. Growing awareness that the world is tightening, narrowing, preparing to close in. You settle back near the fire, listening to its steady crackle. The warmth is comforting, but it is also a reminder. This, more than anything else, will decide how well you endure the months ahead. You glance once more toward the door, where a thin line of light marks the edge between inside and out. Beyond it, the cold waits patiently, and it is not in any hurry. By the time the pale morning settles into something resembling day, the fire has already become the centre of everything. You sit close enough now that the heat touches your face in a steady rhythm, warming your skin while your back still remembers the chill of the room. It is an uneven comfort, but it is constant, and here that matters more than perfection. The woman feeds the fire again, this time with a thicker log. She places it carefully, angling it just enough so the flame can take hold without smothering itself. You notice how she never simply drops wood into the hearth. Each piece is considered. Each movement has intention. On the frontier, the hearth was not just a source of warmth, but the literal heart of the home. It provided heat, light, a place to cook, and even a way to dry clothing and tools. Losing the fire even briefly could disrupt everything. You watch the flames climb slowly along the edge of the new log, licking at its surface before catching more fully. There is a quiet satisfaction in it, the kind that comes from something working exactly as it should. The man kneels beside the hearth, now holding his hands out just as you did earlier. He turns them slowly, first one side, then the other, making sure the warmth reaches deep into his fingers. You notice small cracks in his skin, faint but visible, the kind that come from repeated exposure to cold and dry air. He flexes his hands once testing them. You find yourself doing the same. Cold has a way of creeping in without asking permission. It settles into joints, stiffens, muscles, dulls sensation, and once it takes hold, it can be difficult to push back. There is a soft sound behind you. The child is dragging a bundle of thin sticks closer to the fire. Kindling, light to dry pieces that catch quickly and help sustain the flame between larger logs. Even this task has been given purpose. You glance at the bundle more closely. The sticks are not random, they have been chosen for size, for dryness, for how easily they will burn. Someone gathered them with care, likely days or even weeks ago, knowing they would be needed now. A well-known historical fact is that frontier families often spent a large portion of late summer and autumn gathering and preparing firewood, sometimes stacking several cords to last through the winter. Running out was not simply inconvenient, it was dangerous. You imagine the work behind that stack of wood you saw earlier. Hours of cutting, hauling, splitting, repeated again and again until a supply was built. And even then, there was no guarantee it would be enough. The fire pops suddenly, a small burst of sound that makes you blink. A spark jumps briefly before fading. The room smells stronger now, of burning wood, a deep earthy scent that settles into everything. Clothes, hair, blankets. It becomes part of you over time. The woman moves a pot slightly closer to the flames. You hear a faint bubbling inside something simple, cooking slowly. Perhaps a stew or just water warming for later use. You notice how close everything is arranged around the hearth. There is no wasted space. Clothing hangs nearby, not too close to risk burning, but close enough to dry. A pair of boots sits just within the edge of the heat, their surfaces darkened from use. A tool rests against the wall, positioned so it can be reached quickly if needed. Life here gathers around the fire like a quiet orbit. Historians still debate how efficiently different settlers managed their fuel supplies, especially during unusually long winters. Some accounts describe careful rationing and precise planning. Others tell of families forced to burn furniture or dismantle parts of their own homes when supplies ran low. You feel a slight tension at that thought, even in this calm moment. You look again at the stack of logs. Enough, you hope. A curious tidbit from certain frontier diaries mentions that some families would keep a small reserve of wood hidden away separate from the main pile. Not for daily use, but for emergencies. A final safeguard against the worst days of winter. Whether it was ever truly untouched is another question. The man reaches for a metal poker and adjusts the logs, slightly shifting them to improve airflow. The flames respond almost immediately, growing stronger, brighter. He nods once satisfied. You begin to understand that tending a fire is not passive. It requires attention, awareness, small corrections made at the right moment. Too much wood and the fire chokes. Too little and it fades. You lean forward slightly, feeling the warmth more fully now. It spreads through your chest, easing the lingering chill. Your breathing slows, matching the steady rhythm of the flames. Outside, the wind brushes against the cabin again, but it feels distant now. Muted. Held at bay at least for the moment. You close your eyes, briefly listening. The crackle of burning wood, the soft bubbling of the pot, the quiet movements of the people around you. There is something almost hypnotic about it. And yet beneath that calm, there is always a thread of awareness. The fire must be maintained, always. You open your eyes again and notice the ashes at the base of the hearth. Grey and soft, they hold the memory of earlier flames. You remember how the woman stirred them this morning, bringing hidden embers back to life. Nothing is wasted here, even the ashes have a role. In some cases, settlers would use cooled ashes for cleaning, mixing them with water to create a basic form of lye soap. It was a simple but effective way to maintain some level of hygiene in a place where resources were limited. You glance at your hands again, imagining them washed with such a mixture. Harsh, perhaps, but necessary. The child adds another small stick to the fire, watching closely as it catches. There is a quiet pride in the action, a small contribution to something larger. You realize that everyone here is connected to this single task, keeping the fire alive. It is not just warmth, it is time, it is food, it is comfort, it is survival. You shift slightly on the bench, letting the warmth settle deeper into you. The room feels more stable now, less fragile. The fire has taken hold, and with it a sense of control returns. But only for now. You glance once more toward the door, where the thin line of light has grown slightly brighter. The day is moving forward, whether you are ready or not. The cold outside has not disappeared. It is simply waiting for its moment. And inside this small cabin, everything revolves around staying one step ahead of it. As the fire settles into a steady, reliable burn, your attention drifts from the flames to the quiet activity unfolding just beyond them. The woman lifts the lid from the pot, releasing a thin cloud of steam that curls upward and disappears into the dim air above. The scent that follows is simple but comforting. Something earthy. Root vegetables, perhaps. Maybe a bit of dried meat softened slowly over heat. You realize with a small shift in awareness that every meal here is a calculation. Nothing is casual. Nothing is wasted. She dips a wooden spoon into the pot and stirs slowly, scraping gently along the bottom to keep anything from sticking. The sound is soft, rhythmic, almost soothing. You watch the motion, noticing how controlled it is, how practiced. Food on the frontier was rarely fresh during winter. Instead, families relied on preserved supplies gathered months earlier. Salted meat, dried beans, cornmeal and root vegetables stored in cool, dark places formed the backbone of survival through the coldest months. You glance toward a low hatch in the floor near the corner of the cabin. The man moves towards it now, kneeling and lifting it open, with a quiet effort. A faint breath of colder air rises from below, carrying a damp, earthy scent. He reaches down and retrieves a few items. Potatoes, you think, perhaps turnips. Their surfaces are rough, still holding traces of soil. A root cellar. Even here inside the cabin, there is a deeper layer of storage. A place where temperature remains more stable, protected from both freezing winds and the warmth of the fire. Historians still argue whether root cellars were consistently effective in extreme winters, especially when temperatures dropped far below normal. Some accounts suggest that even these underground spaces could freeze, turning stored food solid and difficult to use. Others describe careful insulation methods that kept them functional through most conditions. You watch as the man brushes off the vegetables lightly before handing them over. The woman nods once, then begins preparing them with a small knife, cutting slowly, deliberately. Each piece is added to the pot without hurry. There is no rush because there is no excess. Time is stretched here, just like everything else. You lean slightly closer, letting the warmth from the fire mix with the rising steam. The smell grows stronger now, filling the cabin with a quiet promise of nourishment. Not luxury, not abundance, but enough. A lesser-known detail from frontier journals mentions that some families would flavor their meals with whatever they could gather or preserve. Dried herbs, bits of wild onion, even tree bark in certain desperate situations. It was not about taste in the modern sense. It was about making simple food feel sustaining. You imagine that now as you watch the pot. Each ingredient carries a memory of effort, harvested before frost, stored with care, measured out in small portions to last as long as possible. The child watches, two eyes following the movement of the spoon. There is a patience there that feels older than it should be. Hunger, even mild hunger, teaches its own kind of discipline. You notice a small shelf along the wall holding a few cloth bundles and simple containers. The woman reaches for one, opening it carefully. Inside, a handful of something pale and granular. Salt. She sprinkles just a little into the pot, then closes the bundle again, tying it securely. Salt was one of the most valuable commodities on the frontier, not only for flavour but for preservation. Without it, storing meat for long periods became far more difficult. You see how carefully it is used here. Not a grain more than necessary. You shift your position slightly, feeling the wooden bench beneath you. It is hard, unpolished, but solid. Like everything else in this space, it serves its purpose without excess. The fire crackles softly, sending a brief flicker of light across the walls. Shadows move and settle again, giving the room a gentle sense of motion. You find yourself thinking about how different this is from modern life. No cupboards full of options. No quick meals. Every bite here is tied to preparation that began months ago. And yet there is a certain calm in that simplicity. A rhythm. The man moves again, this time checking another corner of the cabin. He lifts a small lid from a container and peers inside. Dried beans, perhaps. He nods faintly, then closes it again. Inventory always. A curious tidbit from some accounts suggests that certain families would keep mental tallies of their food supplies rather than written ones adjusting portions day by day based on what remained. It required constant awareness, but it also allowed flexibility when conditions changed. You wonder if that's what he's doing now, calculating silently, estimating how long each supply must last. You glance back at the pot. The contents have begun to thicken slightly, the liquid taking on a richer colour. The smell deepens, becoming more filling, even before a single bite is taken. The woman sets the spoon aside for a moment and wipes her hands on a cloth. She looks at the fire, then at the pot, gauging its progress with quiet confidence. There is no timer, no clock, only experience. You feel your own stomach respond, a gentle awareness of hunger that mirrors the scene before you. It is not urgent, not uncomfortable, just present. The child shifts closer again, drawn by the warmth and the scent. Their eyes flick briefly toward the shelf, then back to the pot as if measuring time in their own way. Outside, the light has not improved much. It remains muted, the sky still heavy with cloud. The frost you saw earlier likely still clings to the ground, perhaps even thickening in shaded areas. The world beyond the cabin feels distant now, contained. You focus instead on the small circle of life inside. The fire, the pot, the people, everything working together in quiet balance. You realize that survival here is not built on grand actions. It's built on moments like this. Stirring a pot, measuring a pinch of salt, checking a store of beans, each small task layering into something larger. You lean back slightly, letting the warmth settle deeper into you as the gentle bubbling continues. The meal will be ready soon. And when it is, it will not just be food, it will be another step through the cold. The warmth of the meal lingers in you long after the last spoonful is gone. It settles low and steady, not heavy, not indulgent, but grounding. You feel it spread slowly through your body, a quiet reassurance that for now, there is enough. Around you, the cabin grows still again, the small burst of activity replaced by a slower rhythm. The woman gathers the wooden bowls and wipes them clean with a cloth, careful not to waste even the smallest trace. Water is too valuable to use freely, especially when every drop must be carried or melted. You glance down at your hands, noticing how the heat from the fire and the meal has softened them slightly. But already the air begins to pull that warmth away again. It is a constant exchange here. Warmth gained, warmth lost. The man reaches for a bundle near the wall and begins sorting through it. Layers of fabric, some coarse, some softer, all worn. He lifts one piece, turning it over in his hands, checking for weak spots. Clothing here is not about appearance, it is about survival. Frontier settlers relied heavily on wool and animal hides for winter clothing because these materials retained heat even when damp. Linen and cotton, while useful in warmer months, offered far less protection once the temperature dropped. You can see the difference as he handles each piece, choosing carefully what to wear. He pulls on an additional layer, adjusting it around his shoulders, then securing it with a simple tie. The fit is not perfect, but it does not need to be. What matters is coverage, protection. You shift slightly, noticing your own clothing now. it suddenly feels thinner than it should. You imagine adding another layer, then another building. A barrier between your skin and the cold. Not one thick garment, but several each trapping a little more warmth. The principle is simple, but here it is essential. A faint breeze slips through somewhere in the cabin, brushing lightly against your neck. You instinctively pull your collar higher. Even indoors, the cold finds its way in. The woman moves toward a peg along the wall and takes down a heavy piece of fabric. It looks like a shawl, thick and slightly uneven in texture. She wraps it around her shoulders, tucking it close. You notice the edges, hand-stitched, repaired more than once. You said, more than once. A curious detail from certain records suggests that many settlers reused and repurposed clothing, repeatedly turning worn garments into smaller pieces, then into patches, and eventually into stuffing or insulation. Fabric had a long life here, changing form as needed. You watch as she adjusts the shawl, pulling it tighter against the draft. Nothing is wefted. The child too is bundled carefully. Layers slightly oversized, likely passed down or altered from adult clothing. The sleeves extend just a bit beyond the wrists, offering extra coverage. Practical, even if a little awkward. You notice how the child moves within these layers, slower but protected. There is a trade-off in everything. Warmth for mobility, comfort for safety. You glance towards the door again. It remains closed, but you can almost feel the temperature difference on the other side. It's the thin boundary, this wall of wood and chinking. Enough to help, but never enough to fully separate. The man steps closer to the door and reaches for a small strip of fabric tucked along its edge. He presses it more firmly into place, sealing a narrow gap where air has been slipping through. Even the smallest opening matters. Historians continue to discuss how effective frontier clothing truly was in extreme conditions, especially during prolonged cold snaps. Some accounts describe layers of wool and fur providing remarkable insulation. Others tell of garments freezing stiff when exposed to moisture, becoming heavy and difficult to wear. You can imagine both being true depending on the day. You move your hands closer to the fire again, turning them slowly. The warmth returns, but more slowly this time. Your body is learning, adjusting. The man pulls on a pair of gloves, their surfaces rough and slightly uneven, likely made from an animal hide. He flexes his fingers inside them, testing the fit, then nods slightly, ready for whatever comes next. The woman sits for a moment, her hands resting in her lap. There's a brief pause, not quite rest, but something close. You see her eyes move around the room, checking, noting, remembering. There is a mental list here, always. What needs repairing? What needs conserving? What must be done before the real cold arrives? A small but interesting tidbit from some frontier traditions suggests that certain families believed wearing layers of different materials could improve warmth by trapping air more effectively. Wool over linen, fur over wool. Whether fully understood or simply observed through experience, the practice became common in many regions. You consider that as you adjust your own imagined layers, each one adding a small advantage, each one necessary. The wind rises, slightly brushing against the cabin with a soft, steady pressure. It is not yet harsh, but it carries a sharper edge now, a hint of what is still to come. You feel it even through the walls, a reminder. You shift your weight on the bench, feeling the solid wood beneath you. The cabin feels smaller now, more enclosed. Not uncomfortable, but contained. Everything here is designed to hold warmth close, to keep the cold just far enough away. The child leans slightly toward the fire, adjusting their position to catch more heat. You notice how instinctive the movement is, already learned, already understood. You realize that survival here is not just about tools or supplies. It is about habit. Small repeated actions that slowly shape how you respond to the cold. Pulling a layer tighter, sealing a gap, turning toward the fire at the right moment. You take a slow breath, feeling the air move in and out. Cool but manageable. For now, the fire continues its steady burn, the center of everything. And around it, wrapped in layers of wool, hide, and quiet determination, life continues its careful balance against the growing cold outside. The day stretches on in a way that feels both slow and quietly full. You begin to notice how time inside the cabin does not move in clear segments. There is no sharp division between morning and afternoon, only a gradual shift in light and a subtle deepening of shadow along the walls. The fire remains steady, the same gentle crackle marking the passing hours. You sit with the others, and gradually the stillness becomes something you understand rather than something you wait to escape. Outside, the cold continues its patient work. Inside, something else takes shape. The woman settles near the fire with a piece of fabric in her hands. It is worn edges, softened by use, but still strong enough to serve another purpose. She threads a needle with slow precision, then begins to sew each stitch small and even. You watch the motion. In, out, in, out. It is steady, almost rhythmic like breathing. On the frontier, long winters often meant extended periods indoors, and settlers filled this time with necessary work. Sewing, mending, tool repair, and food preparation were not optional activities. They were essential to maintaining life through the season. You notice a small pile beside Hongdu. Pieces of cloth in different sizes, some clearly cut from older garments. Nothing discarded, only transformed. You shift slightly on the bench, letting your back rest against the wall. It is cool, but not uncomfortably so. The fire's warmth reaches you in soft waves, never quite enough to forget the cold entirely. The man sits nearby, working with his hands again. This time he's shaping something more carefully, using a small knife to refine the edges. A handle, perhaps, or a tool meant to replace one that has worn down. His movements are slow, deliberate. There is no rushing here. A commonly accepted historical fact is that many settlers used winter months to repair and create tools, preparing for the work that would return with spring. Farming implements, household items, even small traps were shaped and maintained during these quieter periods. You can see that preparation in his posture. Each cut is precise, each adjustment considered. The child sits close to the fire, holding a small object in their hands. You lean slightly to see it more clearly. A simple carving, perhaps. Something rough but recognizable. A small animal shape. They turn it over, studying it, then glance briefly toward the man, as if measuring their own work against his. You sense a quiet exchange here. Not spoken, but understood. Learning happens in moments like this. Not through instruction, but through observation. You listen again to the sounds of the cabin. The soft pull of thread through fabric. The faint scrape of blade against wood. The steady breathing of people who have settled into the day. There is something deeply calming in it. And yet beneath that calm there is always purpose. Historians still debate how settlers manage the psychological strain of long winters spent in close quarters. Some accounts describe tension, restlessness, even conflict. Others suggest that routine and shared labour created a kind of quiet resilience. Sitting here, you can imagine both depending on the day, the weather, the supplies. You glance toward the door again. It remains closed, but the light around its edges has dimmed slightly. The day is already beginning to fade, even though it feels as though it has barely begun. Winter days are short. You feel that now. Time compresses, folding inward. A curious tidbit from certain frontier letters mentions that some families developed small indoor rituals to mark the passing of time. Simple things. A shared story, a song, a repeated task at the same hour each day. These patterns helped give shape to days that might otherwise blur together. You wonder if that is happening here. You notice how the woman pauses her sewing for a moment, glancing towards the pot, then toward the fire, then back to her work. A quiet cycle. Check, adjust, continue. The man sets his tool aside briefly, flexing his hands again, then returns to his task without comment. Everything flows. You find yourself breathing more slowly now, matching the pace of the room. Your shoulders relax slightly, your thoughts quieting as you settle deeper into the rhythm around you. The fire shifts a log, settling into a new position with a soft crack. Sparks flicker briefly, then fade. You lean forward, instinctively adjusting your position to catch the warmth again. It becomes second nature, this constant awareness of heat, of cold, of balance. Outside, the wind has quieted for now, leaving a stillness that feels almost heavy. The kind of stillness that often comes before something changes. You sense it even if you cannot yet see it. The woman finishes a line of stitching and ties it off with a small practiced motion. She holds the fabric up, briefly examining her work, then sets it aside. Another small task completed. Another piece of preparation in place. The child shifts again, moving closer to the fire, then glancing toward the window. There is curiosity there, a quiet pull toward the world beyond the cabin, even as the cold keeps that world at a distance. You follow that glance. The oiled paper glows faintly with the last light of day. Soon it will entirely, and with it the sense of time tied to the outside world. Inside, the fire will remain. The tasks will continue. The rhythm will hold. You settle back once more, letting the warmth and the quiet settle around you like a second layer. This is how they endure. Not through constant struggle, but through steady, careful living. One small action at a time. By the time the last trace of daylight fades from the window, a new kind of work begins. You notice it first in the way the man stands and reaches for a wooden bucket near the door. It is not a large one, but it is solid, its sides worn smooth from use. He lifts it, testing its weight, then glances toward the woman. She gives a small nod. Water. It is easy to forget how essential it is when you are warm and still, but here it is never far from thought. Drinking, cooking, cleaning, even maintaining the fire all depend on it. And in winter, water becomes a problem. You stand as the man opens the door again, letting in a sharper gust of cold air. It feels different now than it did earlier. Deeper, more settled. The kind of cold that has begun to take hold of the ground itself. You follow him, say, the frost you saw in the morning has thickened into something more solid. The ground crunches underfoot with a brittle sound that seems louder in the quiet evening. Your breath drifts in front of you in pale clouds, each exhale visible, each inhale sharp. You pull your layers closer without thinking. Nearby you see the outline of a well, simple, functional, its edges rimmed with frost. The man approaches it with careful steps, placing the bucket down beside the opening. He pauses for a moment, looking down. You step closer and peer over the edge. The water below is still visible, but you notice something along the surface. A thin layer of ice forming slowly, unevenly. Not yet thick enough to block access, but present enough to warn of what is coming. A widely accepted historical fact is that many frontier wells and water sources would begin to freeze during winter, sometimes requiring daily breaking of ice just to access liquid water. In more severe conditions, entire sources could become unusable. The man takes a tool from his belt, a short metal spike or chisel, and taps it lightly against the ice. The sound echoes faintly down into the well. He strikes again, a bit harder this time, breaking the thin layer into small fragments that drift apart. You listen to the sound, sharp, echoing. It carries a sense of effort even in this small action. He lowers the bucket carefully, the rope creaking softly as it uncoils. You watch it descend, then hear the faint splash as it reaches the water below. He waits a moment, then pulls it back up, hand over hand, steady and controlled. You feel the strain in your own arms, just watching. This is not a task done once. It is done again and again, every day. Sometimes more than once. You take a step back, glancing around. The world feels different out here now. Quieter. The forest stands still, its branches dark against the dim sky. There is no movement, no sound beyond the small actions you and the man are making. Even the wind has faded for the moment. Historians still debate how much time settlers spent each day securing water during harsh winters. Some estimates suggest it became one of the most labour-intensive tasks, especially when snow and ice made travel difficult. Others argue that proximity to reliable sources could ease the burden. Either way, it was never effortless. The man lifts the bucket fully now, water sloshing gently inside. You see the surface ripple, then settle again, reflecting what little light remains. He turns toward the cabin, and you follow. The walk back feels slightly longer. Not because of distance, but because of the cold pressing in from all sides. Your fingers begin to lose sensation at the edges, a subtle numbness that creeps in quietly. You flex them, trying to keep the feeling. Inside, the warmth of the fire greets you again, but it takes a moment to fully reach your skin. The contrast between outside and inside is sharper now, more noticeable. The man sets the bucket near the hearth, close enough to prevent freezing, but not so close that it will heat too quickly. He dips a smaller container into it, then pours some water into the pot still resting over the fire. The woman adjusts the lid slightly, allowing steam to escape. You notice how carefully the water is handled. Every drop matters. A curious detail from certain accounts mentions that in extreme conditions, some settlers would collect and melt snow as an additional water source. However, this required significant fuel to heat, making it less efficient and less absolutely necessary. You glance toward the door again, imagining the snow that will soon cover the ground more deeply. Endless, perhaps. The child watches as the water is poured, eyes following the movement with quiet interest. It is another small lesson, another piece of understanding added to many others. Water is not just there, it is gathered, earned. You move closer to the fire again, holding your hands out. The warmth returns slowly, pushing back against the chill that clung to you outside. Your fingers tingle slightly as sensation comes back. You realize how quickly the cold can take hold, and how much effort it takes to reverse even a small part of it. The man wipes his hands on his coat, then sets the empty bucket aside. It will be needed again soon enough. Always needed. The woman stirs the pot again, incorporating the added water, adjusting the balance without hesitation. Everything here is about balance. Heat and cold, supply and use, effort and rest. You sit once more, letting the warmth settle into you, listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin. The fire, the soft movement of water, the quiet presence of others sharing this space. Outside, the cold deepens unseen but constant. Inside, each action continues to push gently against it, not in defiance, but in steady, patient resistance. Not long after the water has been brought in and settled near the fire, the man reaches again for his coat. This time there is no pause. You notice it immediately. A different kind of purpose. He pulls the coat on, adjusts his gloves, and takes up a lantern from a small hook near the door. The flame inside flickers softly as he lifts it, casting a warm, moving light across the walls. You already know where he's going. You stand again, feeling the familiar shift as you prepare to step back into the cold. The woman glances up briefly, then returns to her work. No words are needed. This is part of the routine. As essential as tending the fire or preparing food. Animals must be checked. The door opens and the cold greets you once more, sharper now in the deepening evening. The sky has darkened to a heavy blue-grey, and the first faint hints of starlight struggle through the cloud cover. You follow the man across the clearing. The ground crunches more firmly underfoot, the frost thickening into something that almost feels like a thin crust of snow. Each step leaves a mark that lingers. Ahead you see the outline of a small structure, a barn or perhaps a simple shelter. Its walls are rough like the cabin, but lower, more compact, built not for comfort, but for protection. The man lifts the lantern slightly as you approach, its light spilling across the entrance. You hear movement inside, soft shifting sounds, a low breath. The door creaks as it opens, and a wave of warmer, heavier air drifts out to meet you. It smells different from the cabin, earthier, mixed with hay animal musk and the faint dampness of enclosed space. You step inside. Shapes begin to form in the lantern light. A horse stands near the back, its breath visible in slow, steady clouds. A few chickens cluster together on a low perch, feathers, puffed up heads tucked close to their bodies. In one corner you notice a small pen, perhaps holding a pig or a goat. Everything here is quiet but not still, living. On the frontier, livestock were critical to survival, providing food, labour and materials such as wool and hides. Protecting them during winter was just as important as protecting the family itself. You watch as the man moves through the space, checking each animal in turn. He runs a hand along the horse's side, feeling for warmth, for signs of distress. The animal shifts slightly, acknowledging his presence, but not resisting. There is familiarity here. Routine. You step closer, noticing how the horse's coat appears thicker than you might expect. Winter growth, natural insulation. Still, even with that, it depends on shelter on bear. The man adjusts a bundle of hay, spreading it more evenly. He checks a water container, tapping lightly at its surface. You hear a dull sound. Ice. He breaks it with a quick practice motion, just enough to allow access. The fragments drift aside and the horse lowers its head slightly, taking a slow drink. Historians still debate how well different types of livestock adapted to harsh frontier winters. Some records suggest certain breeds were remarkably resilient, while others describe significant losses during extreme cold spells, especially when shelter or feed was insufficient. You can see how much attention is given here. Every animal matters. A small interesting tidbit from some frontier accounts mentions that chickens were sometimes brought inside the main cabin during the coldest nights to keep them alive and maintain egg production. It may not have been pleasant, but it was practical. You glance back toward the chickens, now imagining them closer inside the warmth of the firelit room. It would make sense. The man moves to the corner pen, checking the smaller animal there. He adjusts a covering, perhaps a simple cloth or layer of a straw, making sure it is properly arranged. Insulation again. Everything with theaters comes back to that. You notice how the barn itself is built. Low ceiling, thick walls, fewer openings. It holds heat more effectively than the cabin, despite having no fire of its own. The animals generate warmth, and the enclosed space traps it, creating a shared environment where each living body contributes. You stand still for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the dim light. The sounds are different here. Soft breathing, the faint rustle of straw, the occasional shift of weight. There is a calmness in it, a quiet acceptance of the night. The man finishes his checks, giving each space one last glance before turning back toward the door. He lowers the lantern slightly, careful not to startle anything as he moves. You follow him up. The cold feels sharper now after the relative warmth of the barn. It wraps around you quickly, reminding you that the shelter you just left was only temporary. The sky above is darker now, the clouds thinning just enough to reveal a few scattered stars. They look distant, cold, almost brittle. You walk back towards the cabin, your breath steady, your steps measured. Behind you the barn settles into silence once more, its occupants gathered together against the night. Inside the cabin the fire still burns. You feel its presence even before you open the door. The man steps in first, setting the lantern back on its hook. The woman glances up again briefly, then returns to her sewing. The rhythm continues. You move closer to the hearth, holding your hands out once more. The warmth returns slow but certain. You realize now how many layers of effort are involved in survival here. The cabin, the fire, the water, the animals, each one requiring attention, each one connected. You sit down again, letting the warmth settle into you as the night deepens outside. Beyond the walls, the cold grows stronger, but inside for now everything is holding. The night does not fall all at once. It settles slowly, almost gently, as if the world outside is dimming in layers rather than disappearing entirely. You notice it in the window first, where the faint glow fades into a darker, softer shade, until there is nothing left but a pale reflection of the fire behind you. Inside the cabin feels smaller now, not in a physical sense, but in the way sound and movement draw closer together. The walls seem to hold everything in every breath, every shift of fabric, every quiet crackle from the hearth. You sit still listening. The fire has changed its tone. Earlier it snapped and popped with small bursts of energy. Now it burns lower, steadier, the sound softer, more contained. The larger logs glow with a deep orange light, their edges slowly giving way to ash. The woman adjusts one of them, nudging it slightly with a stick, careful not to disturb the balance. You see how she waits after the movement, watching the flames respond, making sure they settle into a stable burn again. The fire never truly rests. Neither can they. Outside the wind returns. This time it is different. Stronger. You hear it before you feel it, a low rising sound that moves through the trees and presses against the cabin walls. It does not rush or gust. It builds steady and insistent, like something gathering its strength. You glance toward the door, then toward the ceiling. The structure holds, but you become aware of every small weakness. A faint tremor along the wall, a soft whistle through a narrow gap. You pull your layers closer, even though you are near the fire. A widely accepted historical fact is that blizzards on the American frontier could arrive with little warning, bringing strong winds and heavy snowfall that reduced visibility to almost nothing. In such conditions, even stepping a short distance from shelter could become disorienting and dangerous. You imagine that now as the wind rises further. The sound grows louder, pressing against the cabin like a slow wave. The child looks up, eyes widening slightly, not in panic but in recognition. This is not unfamiliar, just unwelcome. The man stands moving toward the door again, but this time he does not open it. Instead, he checks the latch, pressing it firmly into place. He runs his hand along the frame, feeling for drafts, adjusting the cloth where needed. Every small barrier matters now. You feel the temperature shift slightly, even inside. Not a sharp drop, but a subtle change, as if the cold outside has taken a step closer. Historians still debate how accurately settlers could predict incoming storms without modern tools. Some relied on changes in wind patterns, cloud formations, or even the behavior of animals. Others were caught completely off guard, their preparations tested without warning. You wonder what signs were noticed today. The thicker frost on, the quiet afternoon, the stillness before this rising wind. A curious tidbit from certain accounts suggests that some families would tie ropes between buildings during heavy snowstorms, creating a guide to follow when visibility dropped. Without such measures, even a short walk to a barn could become disorienting in a whiteout. You think of the barn now just beyond the clearing. It feels farther away than it did before. The wind presses harder. You hear something strike the side of the cabin. Not heavy, but sharp enough to make you turn your head. Perhaps a loose branch or the debris carried by the rising gusts. The fire flickers in response, the flames bending slightly as air shifts within the room. You lean closer, instinctively drawn toward its warmth. The woman adds another log, this time thicker, heavier. She places it carefully, knowing that the fire will need to last through the night, perhaps with more strength than usual. The man returns to his place, but he does not sit fully. He remains slightly forward, listening alert. You notice the difference. This is not the calm of earlier. This is readiness. The child moves closer to the fire, pulling their layers tighter. You see their eyes shift between the flames and the door, following the rhythm of sound outside. The wind continues to build. It moves through the trees with a deeper voice, now a low roar that rises and falls. You imagine the branches swaying, the snow or frost beginning to lift from the ground, carried into the air. The cabin creaks softly, wood responding to pressure. You feel it through the bench, a subtle vibration that reminds you how thin the barrier is between inside and out. You take a slow breath, letting it out carefully. There is no panic here, only awareness, preparation. You glance at the fire again. It burns steadily stronger now with the added log. The light fills the room, pushing back against the darkness that presses at the edges. You realize how much depends on this single point of warmth. Without it, the cold would not just be outside. It would be everywhere. The woman finishes adjusting the hearth and sits back slightly, her hands resting for a moment. Her eyes move across the room, checking each detail, each small element that contributes to their safety. The man finally lowers himself to sit, though his posture remains alert. The child leans slightly against the bench, still watching. You listen again. The wind, the fire, the quiet breathing of the people around you, everything layered together. Outside, the storm is beginning. Inside, the balance holds. For now, the wind does not stop, it deepens. You sit there close to the fire and feel the shift as the storm fully settles in. What began as a steady push has become something heavier, more constant. The sound is no longer rising and falling. It is sustained like a long breath that never quite releases. You notice how it fills the spaces between other sounds. Even the fire seems quieter beneath it. The man stands again, slower this time, and moves toward the door. He presses his shoulder lightly against it, testing its strength, feeling the pressure from outside. It holds, but not without effort. You watch closely. This is the moment when preparation meets reality. The woman reaches for another strip of cloth and moves to a section of wall where a faint draft has begun to slip through. You can see it now just barely. A subtle movement of air that causes the edge of a hanging fabric to tremble. She presses the cloth firmly into place, sealing the gap. Every small opening becomes important. On the frontier, severe winter storms could force families to remain indoors for days at a time, relying entirely on what they had already prepared. Travel during such conditions was often impossible, and even nearby help became unreachable. You feel that isolation now. The cabin is no longer just a shelter. It is everything. The child shifts closer still, almost within arm's reach of the fire. Their eyes flick toward the ceiling as a stronger gust passes over. causing a faint creak in the beams above. You follow that glance. The roof holds, but you become aware of its presence in a new way, not just as protection but as something that must endure. Historians still debate how well early cabins withstood prolonged winter storms, especially in regions where snowfall accumulated heavily. Some structures collapsed under weight, while others built with careful placement and stronger timber survived year after year. You find yourself studying the beams now, the way they meet, the way they carry the load. Simple but purposeful. The fire shifts again, the new log catching more fully. Flames rise a little higher, casting stronger light across the room. Shadows move along the walls, stretching and shrinking with each flicker. You feel the warmth more clearly now, and you lean into it without thinking. Outside, something strikes the cabin again, louder this time. A dull thud followed by a scraping sound. Perhaps a branch torn loose by the wind. The man turns his head slightly, listening, but he does not move to open the door. Not now, not in this. A small curious detail from certain accounts suggests that during intense storms, some settlers would mark the interior layout of their cabin in their minds so thoroughly that they could move around in near darkness if needed, conserving light and fuel. It speaks to a level of familiarity that comes only from living closely within a space. You imagine that now, moving without sight, knowing each step. The woman returns to her place near the fire, but her movements are more deliberate now. She reaches for the pot, stirring it briefly, then adjusts its position slightly closer to the heat. Warmth must be maintained. Food must remain ready. Everything must continue even as the storm builds. You feel the air inside shift again, a slight pull toward the walls as the wind presses harder outside. It is subtle but noticeable. The cabin breathes with the storm expanding and tightening in small ways. You pull your layers closer. The child does the same. The man finally sits again, though his posture remains forward, alert, as if ready to stand again at any moment. You realize that a rest here is never complete. Not during a storm. A lesser known fact is that prolonged exposure to cold environments, even indoors, could lead to gradual heat loss if fires were not carefully maintained. Settlers had to balance conserving fuel with generating enough warmth to prevent dangerous drops in temperature inside their homes. You glance at the fire again, still strong. Still steady, but always needing attention. The wind continues. You listen more closely now. There are layers to it. A deeper, constant rush, higher-pitched whistles as it finds small gaps, occasional impacts as debris strikes the walls. It is not chaotic. It is persistent. You feel a strange calm settle over you as you listen. Not because the storm is gentle, but because everything inside the cabin is responding as it should. The walls hold. The fire burns. The people move with purpose. You take a slow breath, letting it out evenly. The warmth reaches you again, steady and reliable. You look around the room, at the careful placement of every object, at the quiet focus of each person, at the fire glowing at the center. This is how they face the storm. Not by stopping it, not by fighting it directly, but by enduring it. Moment by moment, you shift slightly, settling into your place near the hearth. Outside, the storm continues to build. Inside, the balance holds. And for now, that is enough. The storm carries on into the deep hours of the night, and with it comes a different kind of awareness. You begin to notice the sounds between the sounds. At first, it is only the wind, a constant presence pressing and circling, brushing along the walls and roof. But as you sit there closer to the fire, wrapped in layers that now feel necessary rather than optional, you start to hear something else beneath it. A faint distant noise. You pause, listening more carefully. It comes again. Not loud, not sharp, just a low, drawn-out sound that rises and fades somewhere beyond the cabin. The child hears it too. You see their head tilt slightly, eyes shifting toward the door. The man does not move immediately, but you notice the way his posture changes. A slight stillness, a focus. You hold your breath for a moment. There it is again, a long hollow call that seems to stretch across the frozen landscape. Wolves. A well-documented historical reality is that wolves were a common presence in many frontier regions, particularly during winter when food became scarce and their movements brought them closer to human settlements. You feel something tighten slightly in your chest, not fear exactly, but awareness. The sound is distant, for now. The woman glances up briefly, then returns to her work, though her movements slow just a little. You can tell she is listening too, even if she does not show it openly. The fire crackles softly, its warmth steady, its light pushing back against the dark corners of the cabin. Outside, the wind continues to move, but the howling cuts through it in a way that feels more deliberate, more focused. Historians still debate how frequently wolves posed a direct threat to settlers. Some accounts describe rare but serious encounters, particularly when livestock was involved. Others suggest that wolves generally avoided humans unless driven by extreme hunger. You think of the barn now, or now, of the animals, and of the thin distance between that shelter and the open wilderness. A curious tidbit from certain frontier stories suggests that some families believed wolves would circle a cabin before approaching closer, testing the area, sensing movement and sound within. Whether this was true or simply a reflection of fear and imagination is unclear. You listen again. The sound shifts slightly, moving across the distance rather than staying fixed. It rises, then fades, then returns again from another direction. Not one voice, several. You feel the space around the cabin differently now. Not just cold and dark, but watched. You shift closer to the fire without realizing it, drawn to its light, its sense of safety. The man finally moves, standing slowly and stepping toward the wall, where a long object rests. He lifts it carefully. A rifle or perhaps a musket. He checks it without haste, his movements practiced familiar. Not alarmed. Prepared. You watch closely. There is no panic in what he does, only readiness. The child's eyes follow him, wide but quiet. There is curiosity there, but also understanding. This is not new, just another part of the world outside the cabin. The woman sets her sewing aside for a moment, her hands resting in her lap. She listens openly now, no longer pretending otherwise. The howling continues. It weaves through the wind, sometimes clear, sometimes muffled, but always present. You feel it in the back of your mind, a steady reminder that the wilderness does not sleep. You glance toward the door, again imagining what lies beyond it. Snow or frost covering the ground, trees standing silent, shapes moving just beyond sight. A lesser-known historical note suggests that some settlers used firelight intentionally to deter predators, keeping flames visible through windows or openings to signal human presence. It was a simple measure, but often effective. You look at the fire now. Bright, steady, alive. The man returns a weapon to its place satisfied. He does not keep it in hand, but you sense that it's never far from reach. He sits again, though more upright than before, listening. You realize that this is another layer of survival, not just enduring the cold, but remaining aware of everything beyond the walls. You take a slow breath, letting it out carefully. The warmth of the fire reaches you again, grounding you. The howling begins to fade, not disappearing entirely, but moving farther away. The sound stretches thinner, less distinct, until it becomes part of the background once more. The child relaxes slightly, leaning back against the bench. The woman picks up her sewing again, though her movements remain slower for a few moments before returning to their earlier rhythm. The man remains still, listening a little longer, then finally allows his posture to soften. The storm continues. The fire burns. The world beyond the cabin shifts and moves in ways you cannot fully see, but inside the balance remains. You sit there wrapped in warmth and quiet vigilance, aware now that survival is not just about what you do, it is also about what you hear, what you notice, what you prepare for even when it stays just beyond reach. And slowly as the howling fades into the distance, the cabin settles once more into its steady, careful calm. As the night stretches on, the storm does not weaken, but something inside the cabin shifts again. The tension from the distant howling fades, replaced by a quieter awareness. Not less alert, but more unsettled. You notice it in the way the man finally leans back slightly, allowing his shoulders to rest. In the way the woman's sewing returns to a steady, familiar rhythm. In the way the child's gaze softens, no longer fixed on the door. The storm is still there, but it has become part of the background. You sit with them, the warmth of the fire steady against your hands, and begin to notice a different kind of presence. Not outside, but beyond the cabin in another sense. Neighbors. You had not thought much about them before, not while everything here demanded so much attention. But now, as the hours pass, the idea of other cabins, other fires burning in the distance begins to take shape in your mind. You imagine them, small structures like this one scattered across the land, each holding its own circle of light, its own group of people moving through the same routines, listening to the same wind. A widely accepted historical fact is that many frontier families lived miles apart, separated by forests, rivers, or open land, making regular contact difficult, especially during winter months when travel became hazardous. You feel that distance now. Even if another family is not far in terms of space, the storm stretches that distance, turning it into something much larger. And yet connection still exists. You see it in small ways. The man reaches toward a shelf and takes down a small bundle, unwrapping it carefully. Inside you glimpse something different from the usual supplies. A bit of cloth perhaps, or a small object not strictly necessary for survival. He turns it in his hands for a moment, then sets it back. A reminder, maybe, of someone else. Historians still debate how often neighbours visited one another during harsh winters. Some accounts describe a rare but vital exchanges with families risking travel to share supplies or check on each other's well-being. Others suggest that long stretches of isolation were common, with contact limited until conditions improved. You imagine both. The risk of stepping into the storm, the relief of reaching another door. A curious tidbit from certain frontier traditions mentions that some communities developed informal signals to communicate during winter. A specific arrangement of smoke, a lantern hung in a certain way, even marks left in the snow. These small signs could indicate safety need or presence, without requiring direct travel. You look toward the window again. The oiled paper glows faintly from the firelight within, but beyond it there is nothing visible. Still you imagine another light somewhere out there. Another fire. Another family sitting close, listening, waiting. The woman pauses her sewing and looks toward the door just for a moment. It is not a long glance, but it carries something more than simple attention. You wonder if she is thinking the same thing. The man shifts slightly, reaching for a small piece of wood and placing it near the fire, not yet into it, but ready. Always preparing the next step. The child leans back, eyes half closed now, the earlier alertness fading into a quieter state. Sleep begins to edge closer, even as the storm continues. You listen again. The wind. The fire, and beneath it all, the quiet understanding that this cabin is not alone, even if it feels that way. You feel a subtle comfort in that thought. Not immediate help, not rescue, but shared experience. Others enduring the same night. A lesser-known historical note suggests that in some frontier communities, when winter finally broke, gatherings would often include long exchanges of stories about the season. Who lost livestock? Who ran low on food? Who managed to endure without incident. These stories became a way of measuring survival, of connecting through hardship. You imagine those conversations now, months from this moment, the storm of memory, the details retold. I'm told. You shift slightly on the bench, letting your back rest more fully against the wall. The cool wood contrasts with the warmth of the fire, creating a balance that feels oddly steady. The woman resumes her sewing, the thread moving through fabric with quiet consistency. The man watches the fire for a moment, then glances toward the door again just briefly. The child's breathing slows, settling into a soft, even rhythm. You feel your own thoughts quieting as well. The storm continues outside, but inside the sense of isolation softens. You are part of something larger, even if you cannot see it. A scattered network of small lights in a vast cold landscape, each one holding its own. Each one enduring. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the steady sounds around you. The fire, the wind, the quiet presence of others, and somewhere beyond unseen but imagined other cabins doing the same. The night continues, but you are not entirely alone in it. At some point, without any clear signal, the long night begins to soften. Not with light yet, but with a subtle easing in the way everything feels. The wind, though still present, no longer presses quite as hard against the cabin. Its voice lowers, becoming less demanding, more distant, as if it has spent much of its strength. You notice it first in the silence between the gusts. A pause. Then another. You sit near the fire, your body settled into a quiet stillness, and realize that time has passed more than you expected. The flames have burned lower again, the larger logs now deep in their slow transformation, glowing more than burning. The child has fallen asleep. You see it in the gentle tilt of their head, the steady rhythm of their breathing, the way their body leans slightly toward the warmth. One arm rests loosely at their side, fingers relaxed, no longer curled against the cold. You watch for a moment. There is something peaceful in it. Children on the frontier often adapted quickly to the demands of their environment, learning routines and expectations from an early age. Their sleep when it came was often deep, shaped by both physical effort and the need to recover energy for the next day. You imagine how many nights like this have passed, how many more will come. The woman notices as well. She sets her sewing aside quietly and reaches for a piece of cloth, moving gently so as not to disturb the child. She drapes it over their shoulders, tucking it in with a practiced motion. Even in rest there is care. The man remains awake, though his posture has softened further. He sits with his hands resting loosely, eyes half focused on the fire, half listening to the world beyond the wall. You sense that he's not fully asleep, but not fully alert either. Something in between. Historians still debate how settlers managed sleep during long winter nights, especially when storms and potential dangers required ongoing awareness. Some accounts suggest people slept in shifts, ensuring that someone was always ready to respond. Others describe periods of shared rest when conditions allowed. You feel that balance now. Rest but not complete surrender to it. The fire shifts slightly, a small collapse of ash and ember as one of the logs settles. The sound is soft, almost like a sigh. You lean forward and adjust your position, letting the warmth reach you more fully again. Your movements are slower now, quieter, as if the entire space has adopted a softer tone. A curious tidbit from certain accounts mentions that some families would bank their fires at night, covering embers with ash to preserve heat and ensure the fire could be revived easily in the morning. It was a careful practice, balancing the need for warmth with the need to conserve fuel. You glance at the hearth now. The embers glow steadily, their light dimmer, but more concentrated. It would not take much to bring them back to life. The woman settles back into her place, her hands now resting in her lap rather than working. Her eyes close briefly, then open again, adjusting to the quiet. The storm outside continues to ease. You hear it now as a softer movement through the trees, less forceful, less urgent. The occasional gust still passes, but it no longer dominates the space in the same way. You become aware of the absence of sound as much as its presence. The howling is gone. The sharp impacts against the cabin have ceased. What remains is a steady, distant whisper. You take a slow breath, feeling your body relax further. The tension that had settled in your shoulders earlier begins to release, replaced by a quiet heaviness. You let your head rest slightly against the wall, the cool surface grounding you. Outside, the sky remains dark, but you sense a shift, the kind that comes just before the first hint of dawn. The man finally leans back fully, allowing his eyes to close for a moment longer than before. Not sleep perhaps, but close to it. The woman watches the fire one more time, then lets her gaze soften. The child sleeps on undisturbed. You sit with them, the warmth of the embers steady, the quiet settling around you like a blanket. This is a different kind of endurance. Not action, not preparation, but holding still. Allowing the night to pass, you listen to the slow rhythm of breathing in the room, the faint crackle of the fire, the softened wind beyond the walls. Everything feels suspended, balanced, waiting. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the stillness carry you. The storm has not ended completely, but it has loosened its grip. And in that small change, the cabin breathes a little easier. Morning returns so quietly that you almost miss it. At first, it is only a subtle change in the darkness behind your closed eyes. A faint light, softer than you expect, begins to press gently into the space. You open your eyes and see it there filtering through the oiled paper window. Pale, diffused, and cold. The storm has passed. Or at least it has moved on. You sit up slowly, feeling the stiffness in your muscles, the lingering chill that settled during the night. The fire has burned down to embers again, though a few small flames still flicker weakly along the edges of the remaining wood. The man is already awake. Of course he is. He sits near the hearth, leaning forward slightly. coaxing the embers back to life with careful movements. A small piece of kindling catches, then another, and slowly the fire begins to rebuild itself. A widely accepted historical fact is that maintaining a continuous fire through winter nights was crucial for survival, as starting a new fire from cold embers or without proper tools could be difficult and time-consuming. You watch the flames return, growing slowly but steadily. The woman shifts beside you, waking with a quiet movement. She stretches her hands slightly, then brings them closer to the fire, letting the warmth reach her fingers. The child stirs next, blinking slowly, adjusting to the light. No one speaks. There is no need. The rhythm resumes. You glance toward the window again. The light is stronger now, though still muted by the clouds. It spreads across the cabin in a soft glow, revealing the familiar shapes of walls, tools, and faces. Everything looks the same, and yet something has changed. You move toward the door as the man stands and opens it carefully. The cold rushes in, but it feels different now. Quieter. You step outside. The world has been transformed. Snow, not just a thin layer, but a deep, even covering that stretches across the clearing and into the trees beyond. Every surface is softened, every edge rounded. The ground you walked on yesterday has gone beneath it. You take a step forward, your boots sinking slightly. The sound is muted, almost swallowed by the snow. The air is still, the wind reduced to a faint movement that barely disturbs the surface. The sky remains overcast but brighter, reflecting the white below. You turn slowly, taking it in. The cabin stands against this new landscape, its dark logs contrasting sharply with the surrounding snow. Historians still debate how quickly snow accumulation could isolate frontier families after a major storm. Some accounts describe entire homesteads buried to the point where doors had to be dug out just to be opened. Others suggest that careful clearing and preparation reduced the impact. You look back at the doorway. It's still accessible, but only just. A small drift has formed along one side, pushed there by the wind during the night. The man steps out beside you, scanning the area with a practiced eye. He looks toward the barn, its shape partially obscured but still visible through the brightness. The distance feels longer now, the path less certain. A curious tidbit from some frontier accounts mentions that after heavy snowfall, settlers would sometimes mark paths with branches or stakes to avoid losing direction in uniform landscapes where familiar landmarks were hidden. You imagine that now. This clearing, once defined by uneven ground and scattered objects, now reduced to a smooth white expanse. You feel the cold more sharply here despite the calm air. It settles into your lungs with each breath, crisp and clean, but unyielding. You pull your layers tighter. Behind you, the woman appears in the doorway, watching the scene quietly. The child stands just behind her eyes, wide, taking in the transformation. There is a moment of stillness, not tension, not urgency, just recognition. This is what they prepared for. The man takes a few careful steps forward, testing the ground, gauging the depth. He moves toward the barn, his path deliberate, each step placed with care. You follow your own steps slower, adjusting to the unfamiliar surface. The snow compresses beneath you, leaving a trail that stands out clearly against the untouched ground. You realize how visible every movement is now. No hiding, no blending into the environment. Everything You glance back toward the cabin, seeing your footprints leading away from it. A line of presence. A reminder of where you have been. The barn comes into clearer view as you approach its roof, holding a layer of snow that adds weight but also insulation. The man reaches the door and opens it, stepping inside. You follow. The warmth is still there, though slightly diminished. The animals shift as you enter, their breath visible again in the cooler air. They have endured the night. You feel a small sense of relief. The man moves through the space, checking each one just as he did before. His movements are steady, unchanged, as if the storm has not altered the routine at all. And in a way it has not. The work continues, always. You step back outside once more, looking across the clearing again. The world is quiet. The storm has left its mark, but has also left a kind of stillness behind. You take a slow breath, letting it out gently. The day has begun again, and with it the next stage of endurance. The brightness of the snow lingers even after you step back inside. It follows you in a way carried in your eyes, reflected in the softer light now filling the cabin. Everything seems a little clearer, a little sharper, as if the world has been quietly reset during the night. But the cold has deepened. You feel it immediately. Not the biting wind from before, but a settled, heavier cold that seeps slowly into everything. It clings to the walls, the floor, even the air itself. The fire pushes against it, but you can sense the difference now. The outside has taken a firmer hold. You return to your place near the hearth, holding your hands out once again. The warmth reaches you, but more gradually than before, as if it has more to overcome. The man steps in behind you, brushing a bit of snow from his coat. It falls in small clumps onto the floor, melting slowly near the edges where the heat reaches. He glances once more toward the door, then closes it firmly. Another day begins. On the frontier, the period immediately after a heavy snowfall was often one of the most physically demanding as settlers worked to clear paths, access that supplies, and ensure that structures and animals remained safe under the added weight and isolation. You can feel that demand in the room now. Not spoken, but understood. The woman moves toward the door again, this time taking a simple tool with her. A wooden shovel, roughly shaped but sturdy. She opens the door just enough to step outside, then begins clearing the drift that has built up along the entrance. You watch from inside. Each movement is deliberate, steady. She does not rush, but she does not pause either. The snow is pushed aside in small sections, creating a narrow path that allows the door to open more freely. You notice how she focuses on the edges first. The places where snow could pack tightly and freeze. Prevention. Always. A widely accepted historical fact is that accumulated snow around structures could lead to serious issues if left unattended, including blocked exits and increased pressure against walls and doors. Regular clearing was necessary to maintain access and safety. You step closer to the doorway, feeling the cold brush against your face again as you observe her work. The snow is deeper than it first appeared. Each push of the shovel reveals another layer beneath, compacted by wind and weight. It resists slightly, then gives way. You imagine doing this for hours, day after day. The man begins preparing tools inside, setting aside what will be needed next. He checks a length of rope, coiling it carefully, then places it near the door. You recognize the purpose now. Paths, guidance, connection between the cabin and the barn. Historians still debate how settlers maintained safe routes during deep winter conditions, especially when repeated snowfall erased previous paths. Some accounts describe the use of packed trails that had to be walked regularly to remain visible. Others mention markers, ropes, or fences used as guides. You think of the clearing outside now, smooth and uniform. Without effort, it would quickly become disorienting. The woman returns inside, briefly brushing snow from her clothing, then steps back out again to continue clearing. The child watches from near the fire eyes, following each movement. There is curiosity there, but also an early understanding that this is part of life. Work follows the storm. Always. A curious tidbit from certain frontier communities suggests that some families would intentionally stomp down paths immediately after snowfall, creating a compacted surface that resisted further drifting. It was a simple technique, but effective when done consistently. You step outside this time, joining the work. The cold greets you again, steady and unyielding. You take hold of another tool, feeling its rough handle in your hands. You begin to push the snow aside. It is heavy. Each movement requires effort, your arms adjusting quickly to the resistance. The snow shifts, slides, then settles again in a new place. You focus on the motion. Push, lift, move. It becomes a rhythm much like everything else here. The man steps out as well, taking up the rope. He moves toward the barn, securing one end near the cabin before stretching it across the clearing. You watch as he ties it firmly, then continues forward, anchoring it along the way. A line through the snow. A guide. You follow the rope with your eyes, seeing how it cuts across the white surface, providing direction in a landscape that now offers very few visual cues. You return to clearing, working alongside the woman, your movements gradually becoming more efficient. The cold presses in, but the effort generates its own warmth, a different kind of heat that rises from within. Your breath quickens, slightly visible in short bursts. You pause for a moment, looking around. The clearing is changing again, not from the storm but from your actions. Paths forming, space opening, control slowly returning. You feel a quiet satisfaction in that, not victory, but progress. You step back toward the cabin, setting the tool aside for a moment and moving closer to the fire once more. The warmth greets you again stronger now after the effort outside. You hold your hands out, letting the heat settle into them. The day has begun. The work continues, and the cold, though still present, is met with steady, deliberate action. One path at a time, the path between the cabin and the barn begins to take shape as the morning stretches forward. You can see it now, a narrow line pressed into the snow, guided by the rope that runs steady and taut between the two structures. It is not wide, not comfortable, but it is enough. Enough to move with purpose, enough to avoid losing direction when the light fades or the weather shifts again. You step carefully along it, testing each section with your weight. The snow beneath your boots feels firmer, here compacted by repeated steps. It holds better than the untouched surface around it. You begin to understand how quickly this path will become essential. Without it, even a short walk could turn uncertain. The man tightens the rope slightly, checking each knot where it has been secured. His movements are precise, practiced. He pulls once, then again, ensuring it will hold even if more snow falls. You follow his gaze outward for a moment. The clearing still looks wide and open, but there's a new quality to it now. Less like a space you can move freely through and more like something that must be navigated carefully. On the frontier, many settlers relied on simple but effective methods like ropes, fences, or marked trails to maintain orientation during winter storms, especially when visibility dropped or snow covered familiar landmarks. You see how valuable that becomes here. You walk a few steps farther along the path, reaching the barn again. The door opens with a slight resistance from the cold, but it gives. Inside, the animals shift as before, their present steady grounding. The man checks them again just as he did earlier. There is no difference in the routine, no adjustment for the weather beyond what is necessary. You realize that consistency is part of survival, not reacting wildly, but continuing. Historians still debate how much settlers adapted their daily routines during extreme winter conditions. Some accounts suggest strict adherence to routine provided stability and reduced risk. Others describe adjustments based on weather severity, with certain tasks delayed or modified. You sense that here the balance leans toward consistency, routine as structure, routine as reassurance. A small interesting detail from certain records mentions that some settlers learned to read the snow itself, observing how it drifted where it collected and how it hardened. These patterns could reveal wind direction, predict weak areas, and guide safer movement. You look down at the path beneath your feet. You begin to see it differently, not just as ground, but as information. You notice where the snow is packed tighter, where it gives slightly more under pressure, where small ridges form along the edges from repeated steps. Each detail matters. The man adjusts a bundle of hay again, then checks the water container, breaking a thin layer of ice that has already begun to reform. Even here inside the barn, the cold continues its quiet work. You realize how constant it is, never stopping, always pressing. You step back outside once more, following the rope back toward the cabin. Your hand brushes against it lightly as you walk, a small reassurance of direction. The snow reflects the muted light of the sky, making everything appear brighter than it should be. You squint slightly, adjusting to it. The woman continues her work near the entrance, widening the cleared space, pushing the snow farther back to prevent it from drifting in again too quickly. You join her again, your movements more confident now. The rhythm returns. Push, lift, clear. The cold still presses against you, but your body responds more quickly, generating warmth through effort. You feel it in your arms, your breath, your steady pace. A lesser-known historical note suggests that prolonged physical activity in cold environments could create a false sense of warmth, sometimes leading settlers to underestimate the danger of exposure once they stopped moving. The shift from activity to stillness could be sudden and harsh. You remember that as you step back toward the cabin again, feeling the warmth of the fire slowly replace the heat generated by your work. This is a different kind of warmth, more fragile. You sit for a moment, letting your breathing slow, your hands extend toward the flames once more. The woman steps inside shortly after brushing snow from her clothing, then closing the door firmly behind her. The man follows, giving the rope one last glance before stepping in. The path is set for now. You look around the cabin again. Everything remains in place. The fire burned. The supplies rest where they should. The people move with a quiet purpose. And outside, the snow waits. You begin to understand that survival here is not about a single act. It's about maintaining many small systems at once. The path, the fire, the water, the animals, each one requiring attention, each one vulnerable to change. You lean back slightly, letting the warmth settle into you again. The work will continue. It always does. But for this moment, the balance holds steady, shaped by careful hands and quiet persistence. As the day settles into a steady rhythm of work and quiet recovery, you begin to notice something less visible but just as present. Small rituals. They do not announce themselves. They are not spoken aloud, but they repeat gently like a pattern woven through the hours. You see it first in the way the woman pauses before adding another log to the fire. She holds it for just a moment, not long, not dramatic, then places it carefully into the flames. It could be habit, or something more. You watch it happen again later. The same pause, the same motion. On the frontier, many families developed small routines or superstitions tied to daily survival, often shaped by the belief tradition or simple comfort. These practices did not always have a clear purpose, but they offered a sense of control in an environment where much was uncertain. You lean slightly forward, observing more closely now. The man reaches for the rope again, not to adjust it, but to check its tension once more before stepping outside briefly. As he does, you notice he taps the doorframe lightly with his hand before opening it. A small gesture. Quick! Repeated. You file it away on your away in your pint. Historians still debate how deeply superstition influenced frontier life. Some argue that practical necessity outweighed belief in most situations. Others suggest that small rituals provided psychological stability, helping settlers cope with isolation and constant risk. You find yourself leaning toward the second idea. It feels right here. The child too has their own pattern. Before sitting near the fire, they adjust a small object, the carved shape you saw earlier, placing it carefully beside them, not randomly, always in the same spot. You notice it now each time. A quiet arrangement, a sense of order. A curious tidbit from certain frontier accounts mentions that some families carried small charms or tokens bonds, believing they offered protection against illness, bad weather, or misfortune. These could be simple objects. A carved piece of wood, a scrap of cloth, even a coin. You glance again at the carving. It could be nothing, or everything. The fire continues to burn steadily, the center of all these small actions. You notice how each person interacts with it slightly differently, yet always with care. The woman adjusts it with precision. The man checks it with a brief assessing glance. The child watches it with quiet focus, and you now find yourself drawn into the same rhythm. You reach for a small piece of wood and hold it for a moment before placing it into the fire, almost without thinking. You pause just as she did, then release. The flames respond, catching slowly, then growing stronger. You sit back, noticing what you have done. The pattern continues. Outside, the light remains muted, the snow reflecting a soft brightness that fills the clearing without warmth. The path you help create remains visible, a thin line of intention across the white surface. You look toward it through the window. It feels important, more than just a way to move, a connection, a boundary. You realize that these small rituals serve a similar purpose. They create structure. They mark the day. They give shape to time that might otherwise feel endless. A lesser-known historical note suggests that in isolated environments, repeated actions and routines can help maintain mental clarity and reduce stress, even when their practical purpose is minimal. It is not just about what they achieve physically, but what they provide emotionally. You feel that now. The cabin is not just a place of work. It's a place of patterns, of repetition that brings comfort. The woman finishes another piece of sewing and sets it aside, then briefly touches the edge of the fabric before letting her hand fall away. The man returns from outside, brushing snow from his coat, then places his gloves in the same spot near the fire as before. The child adjusts their carving again, aligning it just so. each action small, each action repeated. You begin to notice your own movements aligning with theirs, sitting in the same place, reaching for warmth at the same moments, listening in the same quiet way. The rhythm draws you in. Outside, the cold remains fully unchanged. Inside, these small rituals create a sense of balance. You take a slow breath, letting it out gently. The fire crackles softly. The room holds its quiet shape. You realize that survival here is not only about resisting the cold or managing supplies, it is also about maintaining a sense of order, of continuity, of meaning in small repeated acts. You lean back slightly, letting the warmth settle into you once more. The day continues, the patterns hold, and in them something steady endures. As the hours drift forward, the light outside never quite brightens the way you expect it to. It remains pale, almost reflective rather than radiant, as if the snow itself is holding the daylight in place without letting it fully grow. You sit near the fire and notice how the cabin exists in its own separate atmosphere, now insulated not just by wood and cloth, but by routine warmth and careful attention. Time feels stretched, not slow in a restless way, but extended like a long breath that never quite finishes. You shift slightly and glance toward the window again. The path you helped clear remains visible, though already you can see faint traces of new snow gathering along its edges. Not enough to cover it yet, but enough to remind you that nothing here stays unchanged for long. Maintenance never ends. You stand and move closer to the door, opening it just a little. The air that slips inside is colder than before, sharper, with a clarity that feels almost metallic in your lungs. Outside, the world is quiet in a way that feels complete. No wind, no movement. Just the faint sound of your own breath and the soft compression of snow beneath your boots as you step out. You pause there, listening. The silence is not empty. It is full. You walk a few steps along the path, your hand brushing lightly against the rope as you go. The line feels firm, dependable, a simple solution that now carries enormous importance. You realize how easily direction could be lost without it. In conditions like these, even experienced settlers could become disoriented in a matter of minutes if visibility dropped or landmarks disappeared beneath uniform snow. Accounts from the period often describe people wandering only a short distance from shelter and struggling to find their way back. You stop and look around. The trees stand motionless, their branches heavy with snow. The barn sits quietly at the other end of the path, its outlines softened, its edges blurred. Everything feels closer and farther at the same time. You take a slow breath, then turn back toward the cabin. Inside, the warmth greets you again, wrapping around you in a way that feels almost protective. The contrast is stronger now than it was earlier in the day. Outside is stillness and cold. Inside is movement and heat. The woman has shifted her work again now, sorting through a small bundle of supplies. You notice dried strips of something laid out, carefully inspected, then wrapped again. Preservation continues even after the initial work is done. Food stores were often checked regularly during winter, not just to monitor quantity, but to ensure nothing had spoiled or been damaged by moisture or pests. A single overlooked issue could spread quickly in such limited supplies. You watch as she presses the bundle closed, tying it with a small piece of string, then placing it back on the shelf. Everything has a place. The man sits near the fire, sharpening a blade with slow, even strokes. The sound is soft, almost meditative. Metal against stone repeated again and again. You listen to it for a moment. There is patience in that sound. Tools were maintained constantly during winter, not only to prepare for spring work, but because dull or damaged tools could become dangerous in the critical moments. A clean cut, a strong edge could make the difference between efficiency and exhaustion. You notice how carefully he checks the blade, turning it to catch the light, examining its edge with quiet focus. Nothing is rushed. Good. The child sits nearby, tracing small shapes in a patch of melted water near the hearth. Their finger moves slowly, creating lines that disappear almost as soon as they are made. Temporary, like footprints in the snow. You watch the motion and feel something soften in your chest. Even here, even in this environment, there is room for small, quiet play. You sit again, letting the warmth settle into you, and notice how the day has taken on a steady, balanced rhythm. Work. Pause. Observation. Adjustment. It repeats without strain. There is a kind of quiet mastery in it. Not control over the environment, but understanding of it. You glance once more toward the window. The light has shifted slightly, though it is difficult to say how. Perhaps dimmer, perhaps just different. The sky remains bon. It's overcast, the snow reflecting what little brightness there is. You feel the day beginning to lean toward evening again, though it never fully felt like day to begin with. Time folds here. You lean back, letting your body rest more fully, your breathing slow. The fire continues its steady burn. The tools are maintained. The food is checked. The path remains. Everything in place. Everything continuing. And outside, the vast white landscape waits quietly, unchanged and patient, as if it has all the time in the world. The day fades again, though it never quite felt like it fully arrived. You notice the change not in the light itself, but in the way it withdraws. The pale glow through the window softens, dims, and then settles into that familiar grey that signals the approach of another long evening. The fire becomes the centre once more. It always does. You shift closer without thinking, drawn by the steady warmth as the air inside the cabin begins to cool again at the edges. The woman adds another piece of wood, placing it with the same quiet care you've come to recognise. The flames respond, rising gently, filling the room with a warmer, deeper light. You feel your body relax slightly. There is comfort in repetition. Outside, the snow reflects what little light remains, giving the world a faint, almost glowing quality, even as darkness approaches. You glance through the window and see the path still visible, though softened now, its edges less defined. It will need attention again tomorrow. Everything will. You sit back and let your eyes move slowly across the room. The man finishes sharpening his blade and sets it aside, placing it in the same spot as before. He checks it once more with his thumb, a brief practice motion, then nods to himself. Tools ready. Always ready. The woman adjusts the stored bundles again, not because they have changed, but because checking them is part of the rhythm. A way to confirm that everything remains as it should. You begin to understand that these repeated actions are not just tasks, they are reassurance. In many frontier accounts, families describe the importance of maintaining routine during long winters, noting that predictable patterns helped reduce anxiety and provided a sense of stability in an otherwise uncertain environment. You feel that now, the steady cycle of movement, the quiet confirmation that things are still in order. The child has grown quieter, their earlier movements slowing as the warmth and the dimming light pull them toward rest again. They lean slightly against the bench, eyes drifting towards the fire, watching the flames in that half-focused way that comes before sleep. You watch them for a moment. There is something deeply calming in that simple act. The man glances toward the door once more, not with concern but with habit. He listens briefly, then returns his attention to the room. The storm has passed, for now. But the awareness remains. You realize that it never fully leaves. Even in calm moments, there is always a part of the mind that listens, that watches there, that prepares. A small note from frontier life suggests that people often became highly attuned to subtle environmental cues over time. Changes in sound shifts in air, even the way light moved, could signal important changes in weather or conditions. You find yourself doing the same now, listening more carefully, noticing more. The fire settles into a steady burn, the larger logs beginning their slow transformation again. You see the glowing edges, the deep orange light that pulses gently with each movement of air. It feels constant, reliable. You lean forward slightly, extending your hands, letting the warmth reach you once more. It spreads slowly, easing the coolness that has begun to return. The woman finishes her work for the moment and sets it aside, her hands resting quietly in her lap. She watches the fire, her expression calm, steady. The man shifts slightly, leaning back more fully now, allowing himself a brief moment of rest. The child's breathing slows, evening out into a soft, steady rhythm. You sit with them, the room settling into its night shape once again. Everything feels familiar now. The sounds, the movements, the quiet balance between warmth and cold. Outside, the snow remains untouched, stretching across the land in a wide, silent blanket. The sky above is hidden, the clouds holding the darkness close. You take a slow breath, letting it out gently. The day has passed. Another one endured. You feel a quiet sense of completion, not in a dramatic way, but in the simple acknowledgement that everything has been maintained. The fire is strong, the supplies are secure, the path is clear, the animals are safe. Nothing more is needed for this moment. You lean back slightly, letting your eyes soften as the firelight flickers across the walls. The rhythm continues. It always does. And as the night settles in once more, you find yourself moving with it naturally without resistance. The night settles more gently this time. There is no rising wind, no sudden pressure against the walls, no distant sounds pulling your attention outward. Instead, everything feels quieter, as if the world itself has grown tired after the storm and chosen for now to rest. You sit close to the fire, your body already adjusting to the rhythm that has carried you through the past hours. The warmth reaches you in steady waves, and you no longer chase it as you did before. You simply receive it. Across the room, the others have settled into stillness. The child sleeps fully now, breathing slow and even wrapped carefully in layers that hold the last of the day's warmth. The woman sits nearby, her hands resting loosely, her eyes half closed, drifting between rest and quiet awareness. The man leans back, his posture no longer alert, but not careless either. Just enough attention remains, like a small flame that never quite goes out. You look at them and then at the fire. Everything feels balanced. Not perfect. But enough. Outside, the snow lies undisturbed, covering the land in a soft, continuous layer that reflects what little light the sky allows. You imagine the trees standing still, their branches heavy but quiet, the world held in a kind of suspended calm. You take a slow breath. The air inside the cabin is warm, touched by wood smoke and the faint scent of food and fabric. It feels familiar now, almost comforting in its simplicity. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders rest, your hands lowering from the fire as your body begins to trust the warmth that surrounds you. A quiet truth of frontier life is that survival was rarely about dramatic victories. It was about continuity, about making it through one more day, one more night with enough strength and resources to begin again. You feel that truth settle into you now, not as a thought, but as a quiet understanding. The fire shifts a log, settling softly, sending a small cascade of sparks that fade almost as soon as they appear. The light flickers across the walls, moving gently like something alive but calm. You watch it for a moment, then let your eyes soften again. There is nothing urgent now, nothing pressing, only the steady presence of warmth and the quiet breathing of those around you. You feel your own breathing slow, matching the rhythm of the room. In, out, stay. A softer detail from the personal accounts suggests that many settlers found comfort not in the absence of hardship, but in the familiarity of their surroundings. The same walls, the same fire, the same small routines repeated day after day. In that repetition, a kind of peace could be found. You understand that now. The cabin is no longer just a shelter. It is a space you recognize, a place where each sound, each movement has meaning. You glance once more towards the window. There is nothing to see beyond it now, only darkness and the faint suggestion of the snow-covered world beyond. But it no longer feels unknown, just distant. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the image fade. The fire continues to burn steady and sure. The warmth holds. The cold remains, and for now that boundary is enough. Your thoughts begin to drift, not in sharp lines, but in soft edges. The details of the day blur, slightly blending together into a quiet sense of continuity. The clearing, the path, the barn, the fire, each one connected, each one part of the same steady effort. You feel the weight of the day not as exhaustion, but as a gentle heaviness that pulls you toward rest. There is no urgency to resist it, no need to stay alert beyond what is already held by the space around you. You let your breathing slow further. Your shoulders relax, your hands rest, and in that stillness the world narrows to something simple. Warmth, quiet, presence. The cabin holds you in that space just as it has held everything else against the cold beyond its walls. And slowly, gently, the edges of awareness begin to soften. You are no longer thinking about survival. You are simply here, and that is enough. Now, as the night continues to settle and everything around you grows softer, the world begins to fade in a different way. The fire burns lower. Its light gentler now, no longer reaching every corner with the same strength. Shadows stretch and blend, losing their sharpness, becoming part of the quiet. You remain where you are, breathing slowly, feeling the warmth that still lingers in the air. There is no need to move. No task waiting, no sound calling your attention. Outside, the snow rests undisturbed, covering the land in a calm, unbroken layer. The trees stand silent, their shapes soften their presence, steady and unmoving. Inside the cabin holds its quiet, the soft breathing of those around you, the faint crackle of embers, the gentle settling of wood as it cools. Each sounds small, each sounds steady. You let them carry you. There is something reassuring in this moment in the way everything has come together without strain. The cold remains outside, but it no longer feels like something pressing in. It simply exists, distant and separate. Here there is warmth. Here there is stillness. You feel your body sink a little deeper into that feeling, your thoughts loosening, your awareness drifting. The long day, the careful work, the quiet routines all fade into a single gentle memory. Nothing sharp, nothing urgent, just the sense that everything has been held together. You take one more slow breath, and then another. The fire dims further, its glow soft and steady, like a quiet heartbeat in the center of the room. And as you rest there, surrounded by that warmth and calm, the world beyond the cabin fades completely from your thoughts. There is only this quiet, this warmth, this gentle, steady rest. Sweet dreams.